Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. So this is a channel that no one can ever accuse of being trendy, but you know what? There's been this interesting thing going around recently in which folks have been making these videos of whether or not you'd survive in a particular setting for, a day, a week, a month, what have you, and how you could potentially survive there, how your future might look. And I think that's a really fun thing to do for Tactics Ogre here. So let's go ahead and explore. So we're going to do the reborn version of this one because I think it kind of does open up your options a little bit to not getting stabbed on the highway. And let's go ahead and stick with what we've kind of got two different things that can happen here. For one thing, you might be some random schmuck that washes up on the shores on a boat, in which case your story is very, very simple. Effectively, what's happening in that scenario is that you are going to either end up in the woods if you manage to make it on shore, or you're going to end up working for Darza or Elrig or any of the other random pirates in the area. Realistically, you're probably going to end up trying to hold on to a fortress and hope that they're not going for a good ending. Alright? Sounds good. That is your future if you showed up on a boat. Now, for everybody else, we're going to assume that you just got immediately body swapped with Denim. Just like, poof, he's gone, you're in. That's kind of about that. This gives us a few logistical issues to work through. For one thing, given the overall setting, given the fact that Zenobians are able to travel around, Lodicians are able to travel around, and nobody seems to have much of a language barrier, I'm going to assume everyone's actually just speaking English. There's a lot of English influence. There's also a lot of Eastern European influence, but everyone just sort of seems to get along with each other. The Lodicians are very, Rome-coded. The Valerians are very Eastern European coded, and everybody else tends to be a bit more kind of generic various Europe pieces. So in general, though, everyone seems to speak the same language, so we'll assume everybody's speaking some variant of English. Like, they do have various different accents, and we do have several people that either speak kind of British-esque with their accents or sound kind of Scottish, so we're going to assume they're going for, proper English. Now, that being said, given everything else, it could be Old English, in which case I hope you like jail, because that's probably all that's available to you, but we'll go ahead and give it the benefit of the doubt and assume it's some version of English that you can speak. Okay, so if you end up immediately getting replaced with Denim, you can immediately assume three things. First of all, the Zenobians are probably going to try and help, considering that, you probably don't have anything against them. They're always trying to help out folks nearby them. And Vice and Kashua probably would assume that you kidnapped Denim and would probably try to kill you immediately. So there's a decent chance that you might have instantly made lifelong enemies, and or they might just leave. Also, this is probably the only shot in which Vice has any shot whatsoever with Kashua, but anyway, moving on. So we're going to assume that you basically get inducted into the Zenobian squad in this particular case, in which case, again, your options could potentially expand or contract depending entirely on your ability to convince people of your story. If you are not convincing whatsoever, if you're awkward at talking to people, can't explain your situation at all, then unfortunately you're probably just going to end up getting jailed for not looking like a Wallister. Because remember, everyone here is extremely, violently hateful towards anybody that isn't them. The Zenobians are immediately distrusted despite saving the guy running the castle. So random schmuck number who even knows that showed up anywhere without a flag is going to be a problem for them. They, back in the day, and especially in this situation, you're going to want a faction, and you, buddy, you don't have one. Now, the Wallister are desperate. They might be more willing to accept folks from other places, as we've already seen. So there's a decent chance that, again, you would just get basically made into a servant for the Zenobians, in which case, you know what, that's actually not bad. That being said, though, if you're not convincing or awkward or everything else, yeah, you're probably just going to jail and or being executed as a Galgastani spy or something. So that wouldn't really go well. Okay, so we're going to assume if you can't talk your way out of this situation, it's basically death in jail. Simply put, if you can't convince them that you're not a Galgastani spy or a Liberation Front spy or any of the above or a Lodician or something like that, because again, they don't know who the hell you are, Realistically, hell, even Lindell has problems. So, in this particular case, we're going to assume that due to probably not having any immunity to local diseases, and or probably the fact that Elmorica gets taken over at some point by any of the other factions, yeah, you're probably not making it out of that particular dungeon. But if you manage to get yourself a sweet new job as a squire for the Zenobians or something, that means you're probably getting sent up to Rhyme, at which point you're basically just doing the whole training thing. So you're probably carrying around equipment, probably helping folks out and whatever else. Now you might say, what about a sort of trade job of some sort? Because realistically, some folks might want to go work in the shops, maybe they want to go become bakers or something. But remember that effectively you're kind of warping into this situation as a prisoner of the Wallister. So realistically, at this point, your options haven't really opened up. They're probably watching you. They probably don't trust you. And that whole story of you just sort of popped in out of nowhere isn't really going to fly, despite all the other weirdness that goes on here. Anyway, so you're going to end up getting stationed in Rhyme in this situation. And then, obviously, we eventually have the Dark Knights going and sacking Rhyme. So there's a very, very solid chance of your story ending right here, but we're going to assume the Zenobians get scattered, and at that point, you somehow manage to escape. Let's say you go to Golborza, let's pretend it's Law Route. If this is Law Route, you might potentially end up getting recruited by Goosen. You might end up going and joining their little liberation army over here, at which point your story might potentially just end up ending over in Sonji. Or potentially might just end up ending during one of the many decoy operations that they do. Or, potentially, you manage to escape and make yourself a cozy living in town. Now, what could you potentially do over there? Well, I would assume the shop would probably want assistance. We never quite see one, but we assume that they must have some sort of assistance. We know that they have bakers, because everyone talks about eating their bread and stuff like that. We know that they have liquor distillers, so if you have backgrounds in any of those, that might potentially give you a bit of an edge there, especially if you're particularly good at it. Or, potentially, there's definitely lots of openings for farmers. That being said, it's also not exactly a great time to be a farmer, considering that, again, land is constantly switching hands, so, being a farmhand, it basically just means that the next time somebody comes by, they'll probably just end up killing all the people on the farm and putting their own people there instead. It was just kind of the nature of things. You want to hurt your enemy's economy, you go after their villagers. Frankly, AoE 2 rules applied to real life way back in the day. We don't see that as much here, but we do hear about it happening in the background. Okay. Now, that being said, at any point, of course, obviously, you could have tried to go into Farampa, go live with the bandits in the woods. That probably would result in God only knows what kind of awful conditions, but, they're technically making it, I guess, so maybe you get to go train griffins in the woods. I don't know. But that being said, you're definitely not going in this direction, so I'm going to assume you probably can't make it out here. You don't have a group to travel with, no real money to work with. You can't go this way because Dark Knights are controlling this area. They're basically hostile to everybody, which means that you're more or less limited to this zone right over here. You're probably not making it to Goliath because you don't have any money for a boat, and Rhyme is basically taken, so you're more or less hoping to find a job in the kind of general Elmorica area. Now, that said, you're probably going to end up being a bit shunned at first because, again, not from that area. If anybody from the castle sees you, they know who you are, especially considering that it's a smaller area. Somebody would probably go ask, like, hey, this dude, claims to have been, with these people in Rhyme, at which point you might get accused of treason for abandoning them. So you got to keep a low profile one way or the other. Like, this is what I mean. No matter what direction you go in, you're probably going to have a bad time. That being said, again, we have another fortress right over here, in which case, maybe you might end up getting yourself recruited into the Pirates or the Liberation Front. Either one of those would potentially be a safer option. Either one of the Liberation Front versions could potentially find you as a recruit there. And again, it probably would be your safest bet. They're pretty open to who they'll accept. And generally speaking, outside of the Vice one, they usually don't question people's backgrounds too much. Again, they hire pirates and join pirates at different times as well. Now, with the Vice situation, he's kind of turned a new leaf by that point. Maybe he's kind of cooled off on the whole thing. Maybe he's a bit more accepting. honestly, that could probably go either way. I'm not really sure, but I feel like it probably could go either way on that one. I would figure Kashua probably has probably just up and left the island at this point, so Princess Ending out of the question. Anyway, so we're gonna assume that one way or the other, again, could go a lot of different ways. Joining any one of the liberation fronts would just result in another hopefully we get out of this type of situation. Going to Almorica is basically a countdown until somebody discovers that you're from there, which means that you probably would want a basic job, get a little bit of money, get some traveling food, maybe make your way down to Crisaro, or maybe try to make yourself a little path over here. Uh, Going down to Crisaro would probably be the safest. It's a little bit out of the way of the rest of the fighting. Generally speaking, people would probably not recognize you over there. And outside of that initial kind of Necromancer incursion, which we assume they would have just sent somebody else to handle, we're just going to go ahead and assume it's probably going to be your safest bet. So if you end up going over there, you might end up getting a job as a fisherman or something. You know, could be a pretty decent gig. Probably get just some kind of generic job over there. Probably can safely ride out the rest of the war more or less in peace, I would figure. But yeah, any of the other options would probably result in almost inevitable death, quite frankly. So that being said, let's go ahead and discuss some of the other kind of nitty-gritty pieces here. Realistically, due to travel time to all of these other locations, I'm going to assume without support, it's probably not possible to travel down any of those areas. Without a larger group, most of the woods and other areas and major roads are basically infested with like dragons, large beasts and things. And for those that play the PSP version or One Vision, we have undead absolutely frickin' everywhere, as well as various highwaymen all over the place. So it's simply not safe to travel there. I mean, even traveling through Tynemouth Hill would probably be a 50-50 in terms of whether you'd make it. But given that it's almost inevitable that somebody would probably accuse you of treason and throw you in jail in Almorica, that probably would result in wanting to take that coin flip there. Plus, it's only a handful of like lizards and priests, so there's a decent chance you'd probably be able to sneak by. Okay. So a few other logistics that typically come up. As far as sources of food and water, those seem to be not necessarily plentiful, but it does seem to be a manageable situation. Given that the entire place has been stuck in an endless war for basically forever, water is not so much of an issue, but food is one of those things that's kind of been scarce for everybody, so they're used to scavenging. It sounds like for the most part, whenever folks can't afford to get regular food themselves, they typically will go out and hunt small animals in the woods. We hear mention a few times of hunting things like rabbits nearby, so potentially you could just survive off of those. Additionally, if you manage to actually kill off a griffin or something like that, you would probably have a pretty decent amount of meat, though realistically it's unclear how you'd be able to afford it. That being said, yeah, most of the kind of outskirts of town and everything are pretty frickin' dangerous for, you know, one person traveling alone. This also kind of comes down potentially to what kind of job you would have started with, because everybody has a job in this universe. Outside of the villagers. We're just going to assume you're one of the basic villagers with no skills, maybe. Okay. What else? So let's see. As far as entertainment goes, realistically, nobody has time to worry about that. They're stuck in an endless war, and they're just trying to make it to the end. So they don't seem too keen on doing anything other than fighting additional wars, celebrating winning wars, doing the occasional parades and things, kind of hanging out with friends and or drinking in the case of Azelston. So we're going to assume that entertainment is not really up too high on anyone's list. And as far as finding yourself a house, look, your shelter's whatever's keeping you warm at night. No one seems to have much of a permanent home outside of the kind of higher rank lords and army leaders of the region, so as a generic villager, I'm afraid you're not having much. You might be able to afford housing in an inn or something. You might be able to find yourself a place to stay during the night, but we regularly see people breaking and entering into abandoned houses, so that's probably where you're going to be hanging out. It seems like there's empty houses all over the place. People just sort of show up, stay for a little bit, and leave. There's little in the way of furniture or supplies or anything else. They just sort of find a spot, duck in there, and get out. Like, it's everything's burnt out hovels and destroyed towns, so you're gonna just have to deal with whatever you got. Permanent residence is not gonna be possible until the war ends. Okay, so that's kind of about that. Now, realistically, how does the situation play out with neither Denim or Cashua there? Oddly enough, I think this actually potentially plays out in a bit of a weird way that might potentially be similar to this mod I made a while ago. So years ago, out of curiosity, I made a mod for Rise of Nations. I haven't been able to actually get that. I want to make another video on that as soon as I can get it recording again. But in that mod, I'd gone and made a bunch of different factions, essentially gave them all their appropriate towns and bases and everything, and then just had the AI fight it out. And realistically, in this scenario, what happened was that the Zenobians and everybody else went off from Almorica. They got into a fight here. They ended up beating most of this local area. At which point, a lot of stuff actually ended up going somewhat similar. They joined up with the Almoricans, or with Walster rather. They ended up beating the Galgastani. We had Nibeth just kind of building up his forces over here. We had the Bakram over here. The Bakram tried to invade. They ended up beating most of the Wallister, and then just kind of ended up getting into a fight with the Galgastani at that point. At which point, the Wallister ended up somehow getting into the capital for the Galgastani, and at that point, it just ended up being a fight between those two before they all got swept by Nibeth and his undead hordes. So, potentially, that might just be how it ends up playing out, that Nibeth just ends up winning the whole thing. One thing I didn't mention is that the Dark Knights and Bakram actually, just by pure chance, ended up getting into a fight amongst each other in the middle of all of this stuff. So, while it does play out that way to some degree in the story, in the case of Rise of Nations, it was just a total fluke. So, it was just kind of funny to see that there. I think what happened was that the AI felt threatened being boxed in on both locations, and they thought the Bakram were weaker. But anyways, yeah, the end result was that when Nibeth invaded, everybody was too weak to actually stop them, so everybody became undead. So, yeah, at which point it's probably time to start learning to sing Thriller real good, I guess. So, yeah, I guess that's where the war goes. Anyways, what are your guys' predictions on this whole stupid idea? Let me know. That's what the comments thing is for. And sorry if my voice sounds funny today. I had a bit of a thing where it managed to get so hot in Michigan that I got a cold. Makes perfect sense, but long story short, got a cold that gave me a cough, which suddenly basically gave me hiccups for 2 days straight. No idea how that works, but now my voice sounds weird. But anyway, that's about that. Y'all have yourselves a good one, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.